a prime minister who allows open use of crack, heroin, meth, and weapons.
You can tell he stood up all night against the mirror trying to practice that law.
Weak, incompetent leader.
Why he chooses to continue to court extreme right nationalist groups like Diagolon.
Life as a practicing racist, dressing up in hideous racist costumes so many times.
Canada is in a rough place right now. At the time of this recording, the Broligarchy has just taken over the United States with a potent combination of ChatGPT, racist memes, and nobody trying to stop them at all. Chaos is flooding the zone, and Canadians want to know, does President Trump really want to annex Canada for our resources? Or is this all just revenge for this Donald Cuck photo? But before all that, Prime Minister Justin Barron Trump's real father, Trudeau, recently Joe Biden himself out of office and then prorogued Parliament.
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister.
And if this impeccable timing sounds like a massive miscalculation to you, that wasn't even his biggest regret.
If I have one regret, I do wish that we'd been able to change the way we elect our governments in this country so that parties would spend more time trying to be people's second or third choices. People would have been looking for things they have in common instead of trying to polarize and divide Canadians against each other.
Electoral reform? What a great idea you just came up with. Canada does not need to be invaded by the US to become like the US. Canada's democracy is dying. A few years ago, Canada was ranked the 5th most democratic country in the world. Today, we're 13th, and it's only getting worse.
Singh left his seat and went into the aisle to confront Poilievre. Singh said to Poilievre, "I'm right here."
When will we put an end to this wacko policy by this wacko prime minister?
He's trying to convince Canadians that everything's broken. He just wants them to suffer more, so maybe he has a chance.
So let's dive into Canada's electoral system and see how we might be able to reform it. That is, assuming Canada hasn't already been swallowed like a big gulp of Diet Coke at Mar-a-Lago. Welcome to the Goose Explains. Before diving in, it's worth taking a moment to talk about capital D democracy TM, the system we probably live under, as opposed to little d democracy, the system the United States definitely lives under. But when people like me say democracy is at stake, what are we really talking about? Am I just being a dramatic libtard trying to scare progressives into voting for woke policies like feeding children or not bombing children? Or am I highlighting a decades-long effort to undermine the ability of people to resist corporate power, pushing us into a techno-feudalist dystopia in which we will voluntarily place ourselves into a shared AI simulation to escape the dead planet our forced overconsumption has turned to ash?
But we know that it was us that scorched the sky.
Or is this a self-inflicted wound that just happens to give me an excuse to play this clip of Justin Trudeau falling down the stairs on an infinite loop?
Je mettrais genre ici, là, puis je passerais, puis je dis, hey, comment ça va? Oui, c'est vraiment le fun, là, puis là, tu...
In some ways, it's all three. The first thing you need to understand is voting is not democracy. Russia has voting. America's Got Talent has voting. America has voting. But that doesn't necessarily make it a democracy. At its core, democracy is a decentralized conversation for the purpose of self-government. And because the definition of government includes a monopoly on violence, part of that also includes guardrails to restrict what the government can and cannot do. Democracies assert that people have rights, like the right against cruel and unusual punishment, the right to representation, or as the Supreme Court established in The People versus the Beastie Boys, the right to party. Democracies are supposed to derive their authority from the consent of the people, usually by electing people to represent the people. The tricky part is deciding who those representatives should be. And depending on the mechanism you choose, that outcome can be wildly different. While no system is perfect, some are definitely better than others. But personally, any democratic system is better than just letting Elon decide, because if it were up to him, we'd all be toiling in the ketamine mines on Mars right now. There's a million ways to decide an election, but they fall into two broad categories: winner take all and proportional. These are not technical definitions. They're a shorthand we'll use for this video. But Canada and the US have winner-take-all systems where one party calls the shots after reaching a certain threshold.
Winner! Gagnant!
So, as an all-too-relevant cautionary tale of how not to do a democracy, let's spend a bit of time talking about Canada's best friend / rich next-door neighbor who hoards guns and sometimes does home invasions, the United States of America.
Rock, flag, and eagle!
They elect their president with the Electoral College, aka DEI for red states. How does it work? Basically, every 4 years, a hamster pushes a marble into a Rube Goldberg machine that spends $15 billion on attack ads. Everyone suffers a constant barrage of fundraising emails. Wait times to vote are suspiciously correlated with the color of your skin, and in the end, only a handful of people in a few swing states actually decides who wins. Thankfully, President Trump has promised to end all of that.
Get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed, it'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore. And he knows those computers better than anybody, all those computers, those vote counting computers. So thank you to Elon.
The problem with winner-take-all systems is that they distort the will of the people. Staying with the US, let's run through a quick hypothetical example. Imagine you're running for president, but the vote in every state is tied. Their system says you need at least 270 electoral college votes by winning various states. That means if you just get one more vote in each of the 12 most populous states, the presidency is yours. 12 people, 100% of the power. Good for you, but bad for the other 49.9% of the people who just had their votes flushed down the democracy toilet. Under the US system, it is theoretically possible to swing an election with the same number of people who watched Megalopolis in theaters.
We are here, we are powerful, and we are taking our country back.
What's worse is that in my lifetime, multiple US elections were won by the party that did not get the most votes. This happens in Canada too, and that erodes people's faith in democracy. If you take nothing else from this video, let it be this. Systems create their own behavior. And that's not just true for electoral systems, that's true for literally everything, from sports to financial markets, to office culture, to climate, to AI, to nuclear meltdowns, and more. For our purposes, we need to recognize that political systems create the incentives politicians respond to. If we want to change the way our politicians behave so they work together in good faith, our system needs to reward that. Because currently, it does the opposite of that. And that system is self-terminating. For the reasons we just described, where small shifts in voter preferences can have massive consequences, winner-take-all systems end up rewarding anti-democratic behavior. Historically, that wasn't a huge problem because cultural norms kept those in check. Shame for the win! But as soon as those norms are broken, a race to the bottom begins. US politics is way deeper down this hole than Canada. For example, take the issue of illegal immigration. Talking about that today sounds like...
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
But back in the 1980s, it sounded like...
Do you think the children of illegal aliens should be allowed to attend Texas public schools free? Or do you think that their parents should pay for their education?
I'd like to see something done about the illegal alien problem that would be so sensitive and so understanding about labor needs and human needs that problem wouldn't come up. But today, if those people are here, I would reluctantly say I think they would get whatever it is that they're, what the society is giving to their neighbors. But the problem has to be solved. The problem has to be solved because as we have kind of made illegal some kinds of labor that I'd like to see legal, we're doing two things. We're creating a whole society of really honorable, decent, family-loving people that are in violation of the law, and secondly, we're exacerbating relations with Mexico. The answer to your question is much more fundamental than whether they attend Houston schools, it seems to me. I don't want to see a whole, if they're living here, I don't want to see a whole thing of 6- and 8-year-old kids being made, one totally uneducated and made to feel that they're living with outside the law. Let's address ourselves to the fundamentals. These are good people, strong people. Part of my family is a Mexican.
So why does US political discourse today sound closer to idiocracy than democracy? Especially now that eugenics is apparently back in style. In short, this guy, Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich worked his way up the ranks of the US House of Representatives to eventually become Speaker. Many scholars credit him for almost single-handedly turning an institution known for finding compromise into what it is now. Pro wrestling minus the cooperation. Plus, way more drugs and sex trafficking. Newt was loud, angry, and obstructionist, and unlike most family values politicians, he cheated on his wives with women. He encouraged Republican colleagues to start using words like betray, bizarre, decay, destroy, devour, greed, lie, pathetic, selfish, shame, sick, steal, traitors, and radical to describe Democrats. Sound familiar? His scorched earth tactics worked, making electoral gains for the Republicans. This changed the game. Now politicians who would smear the other candidate tended to win. Therefore, those who were elected were more likely to work in bad faith, constantly pushing the envelope to see what they could get away with. In my lifetime, I've seen John Kerry get swift-boated, Mitch McConnell's obstructionism, and for God's sakes, even President Harrison Ford had to throw terrorists off his plane by hand.
Get off my plane.
The point is, one psychopath can be enough to kick off a democratic death spiral. A feedback loop that generates more attack ads, less substance. More wedge issues, less compromise. More polarization, less democracy. Eventually, you're no longer voting for policy or ideas. You're voting because the other team is evil and must be stopped. Then you wake up one day and the world's richest 4chan troll is in charge of a criminal cost-cutting department named after an internet meme, and you start to wonder if the Planet of the Apes was a better system.
You maniac! You blew it up! That was probably the right call!
Donald Trump is not the cause. Someone like him is the inevitable outcome of a system that consistently rewards outrageous attention-seeking over good faith cooperation. Even if one day the CIA wakes up and says, hey, you know that thing that we do overseas? What if we try that at home? The problem doesn't go away. You still have a winner-take-all system and a whole industrial complex built on top of it, made of lobbyists, dark money, super PACs, and so on. But they also have Cool Ranch Doritos, so good and bad. I bring this up because Canada has a bad habit of importing cultural trends from the United States, except with less money and worse lighting, from Law & Order Toronto to Drag Race Canada to car-dependent city planning. And in return, we blessed you with Kevin O'Leary.
There's unlimited power in Canada. We've been talking about the border between Canada and the United States. That's not the problem. The northern border, where China and the USSR are.
Oof, quick, someone hide that guy's boat keys. The point is, if we don't make some big changes now, I fear Canada will go down this same dark path. So with that, let's take a closer look at Canada's electoral system. Canada's winner-take-all system is called first past the post, based on the UK's famously normal and chill parliament.
And quite frankly, young man, you can like it or lump it.
In Canada, you only vote for your member of parliament. The country is divided up into regions based on population called ridings. One riding, one MP. Believe me, nobody can be an MP for two different ridings at once, no matter how good your disguise is. Conventionally, the party with the most MPs forms the government and the leader of the party becomes prime minister. And I say conventionally because technically, Parliament can pretty much make anyone the prime minister, including, and might be worth a try, this cardboard cutout of Keanu Reeves. The system has two main virtues. One, it's about as simple as you can get. And two, geographic representation, which is crucial in a country as spread out as Canada. But it also comes with a long list of downsides that make it measurably less democratic than other systems already in practice around the world. The first drawback you're probably familiar with: strategic voting. Strategic voting happens when you live in a riding dominated by one or two parties. If you prefer a different party, too bad. Your best bet is to vote strategically for one of the parties that might win. Which is a bit weird because why should other people's votes affect how you vote? This is made even worse when you live in a safe seat where one party always dominates. And they could nominate, and again, I really think this might be worth a try, this cardboard cutout of Keanu Reeves. Because of strategic voting, millions of Canadians don't vote for the party they like most. They vote for the party they hate least. Like ordering a pizza, but the only ingredients available are various types of pineapple. Seriously, who are you supposed to vote for if you're a blue-blooded libertarian that knows deep in his bones that Justin Trudeau's real father is Fidel Castro, but unfortunately you live in a Vancouver riding filled with aging hippies and betattooed oat milk latte sipping lefties? Or what if you and your off-grid commune throuple just bought a vegan farm to supply baby goats for yoga classes in Calgary, but find yourself living in the strong and wind turbine-free pristine viewscapes of rural Alberta? Very relatable questions both, because if you don't vote strategically, you're probably just throwing your vote away. Which brings us to the next issue with First Past the Post: wasted votes. Just like in the US system where if you're a Republican in California, why even bother? Canada's winner-take-all system effectively wastes any vote that doesn't go to the winning candidate. Sure, your vote was counted, just like your vote to watch literally anything other than Love is Blind with your wife was counted. But what are you gonna do? Just sit there and play Nintendo with your headphones in and not react when Monica finds Steven's multiple sex with strangers on his phone? Wasted votes are a huge problem. More than half of Canada's votes are wasted every election, and the trend is only getting worse. Because if you feel like your vote doesn't really count, it's going to affect your level of participation. In the last 10 years, voter turnout federally has dropped from 68% to 62%, and the long-term consequences of this decline may be catastrophic. Supporters of First Past the Post say that the system incentivizes a play-to-the-middle voter strategy. To win, you have to be broadly relatable to one of the most geographically diverse and spread out countries in the world. And that used to be true, both for Canada and the United States. 25 years ago, the joke used to be Democrats and Republicans were identical.
I say your 3-cent titanium tax goes too far. And I say your 3-cent titanium tax doesn't go too far enough.
It's a two-party system. You'll have to vote for one of us.
He's right. This is a two-party system.
Well, I believe I'll vote for a third-party candidate.
Go ahead. Throw your vote away! Don't blame me. I voted for Kodos.
Go! Since First Past the Post is also a winner-take-all system, we are just as vulnerable to the drift towards anti-democratic rhetoric as we've seen in the US. Because once polarization sets in and the middle voter disappears, the game changes. Polarization is a complex process, but to simplify, eventually the winning strategy becomes riling up your base and suppressing the vote for other parties. This is why the discourse in Canada is getting increasingly heated, with a huge increase in anti-democratic rhetoric, also known as demagoguery. Instead of using sound arguments and appealing to unifying ideals, demagoguery appeals to fear and loathing to override people's rationality. And we've seen this in countries all around the world using the same playbook. Make people angry and afraid of some threat, real or imagined. Blame marginalized groups. Say, I alone can fix it, and you will have yourself a little cult of personality that will support you no matter what atrocities you commit. And once that's normalized, it's game over. Look, this is not new information. This is literally ancient knowledge. Plato talks about democratic collapse by demagoguery in The Republic. Thucydides talks about the tyrant Cleon taking power in Athens, and he sounds almost exactly like Trump. Inflammatory rhetoric and normalizing political violence was one of the big reasons Rome collapsed, so no wonder men think about the Roman Empire multiple times a day. We're all afraid we're living through it again. Undoubtedly, a huge reason why this is a global problem is that we've ceded most of our democratic conversation to attention-optimizing social media monopolies, which have their own set of perverse anti-democratic incentives. So, like and subscribe and hit the bell icon and comment to boost the algorithm and support the Goose on Patreon, and please don't Luigi the tech billionaires at their next board meeting. Oh wait, was that joke normalizing the idea of political violence? Isn't that anti-democratic? Or am I just responding to the incentives baked into social media? Speaking of meta jokes, Canada has little sway over people like Mark Needs More Male Energy Zuckerberg. Just look at what happened when Canada tried to get him to pay journalists for the web traffic he was siphoning. Meta simply shut out all news links in Canada on their platforms, but kept the rage-baiting conspiracy peddlers and then canceled fact-checking, which will only kill our democracy faster. So in lieu of a transparent, democracy-friendly social media platform owned by the users, the best Canada can do is change the incentives embedded in our electoral system. It may be too late for the US, but it's not too late for us. Which brings us to Justin Trudeau, and the last time we tried to change Canada's electoral system. You already know that Justin Trudeau's biggest regret was not following through on his promise to change Canada's electoral system. But what really happened? Well, to answer that, let's rewind back to 2012. Yes, 2012. Gangnam Style was blasting on the radio, the prophesied mine apocalypse was busy destroying civilization, and US presidential nominee Mitt Romney was appealing to black voters.
Who let the dogs out? Who let the dogs out?
It was also the year Justin Trudeau became Liberal leader after the party suffered defeat after defeat. At the time, the Liberals weren't even official opposition. This beard was. Folks in the party started turning their attention to our winner-take-all electoral system. After all, in the previous election in 2011, the Liberals got 19% of the vote, but only 11% of the seats. The Trudeau campaign made the 2015 election about progressive change, distinguishing themselves from then Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Oh, Stephen Harper. Now there's a name I haven't heard in a while. I wonder what he's up to these days. Oh God. He co-owns a venture capital firm that invested $350 million into developing military AI for the Israeli government? Yeah, that tracks. So with nothing to lose and everything to gain, Justin Trudeau promised to
make every vote count.
A line lifted directly from advocacy group Fair Vote Canada.
We are committed to ensuring that the 2015 election will be the last federal election using first past the post.
And then Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister, winning a majority of the seats with only 39% of the vote. All thanks to first past the post. This highlights the biggest obstacle to electoral reform: incumbency bias. Just like no one in first place in Mario Kart advocates for the blue shell, no governing party wants to change the electoral system that gave them all the power. After taking office, the Trudeau government created a House of Commons Special Committee on Electoral Reform and did public consultations, including town halls and an online survey at mydemocracy.ca, which grouped people into dumb categories like cooperator, guardian, innovator, and challenger, which all sound like Marvel Avengers action figures from Wish.com. By the end of that process, both the all-party special committee and public consultations had a clear message: Canadians want proportional representation. While there was no consensus on which system specifically, there was a clear preference for proportional representation generally. And that's still true today. A recent poll shows that 68% of Canadians support switching to proportional representation now. Fast forward to 2017 when suddenly, and for no apparent reason, Prime Minister Trudeau backed away from his election promise to bring in electoral reform.
There is no consensus. There is no clear path forward. The fact of the matter is, I am not going to do something that is wrong for Canadians just to tick off a box on an electoral platform. That's not the kind of the Prime Minister I will be.
Now, if you're wondering, wait, he had a majority, why didn't he just force it through? Recently, Prime Minister Trudeau has made some comments that offer us an answer. Remember, during his resignation speech, Trudeau said,
I do wish that we'd been able to change the way we elect our governments in this country so that people could simply choose a second choice or a third choice on the same ballot.
This second and third choice stuff he's talking about here is what's known as a ranked choice ballot. But specifically, he's talking about a ranked choice ballot called instant runoff or alternative vote. Alternative vote was the electoral system Trudeau was really advocating for. And basically, it's our current electoral system, but instead of voting for just one candidate, you rank your choices. If the riding has no majority winner with the first choice ballots, the candidate with the fewest first choice ballots is eliminated. And those ballots are redistributed to the second choice candidates, and so on until a winner is decided. Crucially, alternative vote is not proportional. It's just a different winner-take-all system. So what was all this talk about make every vote count? Well, the answer to that came in an interview he gave to fellow Liberal MP and crypto podcast host urging you to invest in Dadcoin, Nate Erskine Smith.
What do you see as, if I could have that one back, I would do it differently the next time?
Electoral reform. I made two big mistakes on this one. The first one, because of some very strong voices in my caucus who were very, very clear that they wanted to at least be able to make an argument for proportional representation, which I feel very, very strongly would be a mistake for Canada. I left the door open to proportional representation instead of ranked ballot, even within my own team. And that made a whole bunch of people who heard me say, last election is first past the post, translate that into he's going to bring in proportional representation, which I was not, which I never was going to, and I wasn't clear enough on that. We can have the argument about
it wasn't last election on our first past the post. It was make every vote count. Make every vote count is language. I know, but make every vote count was in our platform. Make every vote count was language lifted a little bit from fair vote. So that it was like a few different ways that it was like
and that was deliberately that people wanted to make sure that we were bringing in the fair vote people. Sure. And even though I had been very clear with caucus and at the Liberal Convention in 2012 how much I am opposed to the idea of proportional representation, I couldn't. It was something that I had to leave a little bit of a door open to, and unfortunately, because of that, it got further. And when people realized that no, I was not going to let move forward.
Yeah, you were never going to go there from the get-go.
From the point of view of proportional representation advocates, this clip is infuriating. For them, the message is basically, hey, remember when I ran on electoral reform and used your slogan, make every vote count? Well, that was really just to get your support, and I had no intention of ever letting proportional representation happen. But since I couldn't get my favorite system through without looking like a giant hypocrite, I blew the whole thing up, but now I regret it. My bad. So why was Trudeau dead set on this different winner-take-all system? Well, it might have something to do with the fact that, according to this expert assessment submitted to the House of Commons Special Committee on Electoral Reform, implementing alternative vote in Canada would structurally disadvantage the Conservative Party by 11%, while advantaging the Liberal Party by 24%. Basically, the Mario Kart equivalent of giving only bombs to anyone in first place. Now, to be fair to the Prime Minister, he has pointed out entirely reasonable concerns with proportional representation, and it was his right as a democratically elected Prime Minister to back away from the options he was given. But to me, the fact that he could unilaterally back away from an all-party parliamentary committee and clear public preference for proportional representation is kind of the whole problem with this winner-take-all system. So I guess my question to the Prime Minister is this. Why do you regret not following through on electoral reform? Is it because it meant breaking a vital campaign promise at a rare moment in history that could have addressed fundamental flaws in our democratic system? Or is it because your preferred system would have given you a 35% head start in every election and you wouldn't be stepping down right now? So, now that we know why we don't have proportional representation, let's explore what might happen if we did. There are many proportional systems out there, but at its core is a belief that the seats that you get in Parliament should closely reflect the number of votes you get. Radical concept, I know. Proportional representation is more common than you might think, used in places like Norway, New Zealand, Iceland, Sweden, and Finland. Those 5 countries have the highest score on the Democratic Index, while also happening to be the top 5 countries in the Extreme Sauna League. Coincidence? Now, it would be a waste of time to go through all the technical details of each system and then try to argue the best one for Canada. I don't know what's best for Canada. My whole argument is that one guy shouldn't be able to decide what's best for a whole country because that's not how democracy works. But very quickly, some of the most common systems are mixed member proportional, a system already in place in Germany. Basically, you have 2 votes. One vote goes to your local representative. The other goes to the party you like nationally. Your riding elects a member of parliament where proportional seats are decided by a party list, which ideally are open to the public. Single transferable vote, a system already used in Ireland, and it's basically like the ranked choice ballot we've discussed before, but with multiple members elected per district to add proportionality. And then there's rural-urban proportional representation, which is a little bit like smushing MMP and STV together, adjusted for Canada's geography, similar to what Denmark and Sweden use. According to modeling we referred to earlier, any of these systems would be fairer than the one we currently have. Critics correctly point out that all of these systems do take more effort than just marking an X beside one name. But personally, if a different system is fairer, maybe, just maybe, that extra bit of work is worth it. Democracy hard isn't a valid argument. If it were, we'd still be letting King Sausage Fingers over here run Canada. But if you want more detail on how these systems work, check out the companion interview at the end of this video. All the arguments for proportional representation rest on data that is correlative. You can draw a line between systems and outcomes, but it's not caused by the electoral system directly. It's not magic. What matters is enabling people to work in good faith consistently, which depends on more than just how you elect your leaders. That said, the evidence is compelling. In a landmark study comparing democracies, Ernst Leiphardt, a renowned political scientist whose academic prowess is only dwarfed by his tasting glasses, compared 36 democracies over 55 years. His team found that proportional democracies outperformed winner-take-all systems on almost every measure, including policy quality, rule of law, corruption control, voter turnout, civil liberties, women in office, and more. Perhaps more importantly, citizens were more satisfied with the performance of their government, even when the party they voted for was not in power. And one of the reasons for this seems to be that other parties get to be a part of coalition governments where multiple parties agree to form a majority. But this does have drawbacks, most notably time. Canadians are used to our governments forming rather quickly, but getting multiple parties to form a governing coalition takes way longer. It's hard enough to get friends to agree on 17 different kinds of pineapple on their pizza. Now imagine competing politicians arguing over who gets to govern. Extreme examples range in the hundreds of days. But once those negotiations are settled, the evidence shows it can be much more stable. One study published last year tracked parliamentary term completion rates over the last 50 years, finding that proportional systems significantly outperformed winner-take-all systems. For comparison, Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland all used proportional systems and scored 100%. Canada scored
69, dudes!
In part because, as you know, federal and provincial governments have this annoying little habit of calling early elections at inopportune moments to grab power. Justin Trudeau did it in 2021 in the middle of a pandemic. Doug Ford did it this year in the middle of tariff turmoil with the United States. And I think I speak for everyone when I say, F off, bud. Nobody asked for this. But also, nice hat. I'll give you that. When it comes to polarization, the data suggests proportional systems help to reduce it. This graph plots out out-party dislike versus the proportionality of the electoral system. Canada and the US are way up here in the angry corner. And look at the Netherlands in their happy little Dutch corner. There's also a strong correlation between proportional representation and fiscal responsibility. One regression analysis showed that they tend to have higher surpluses and lower debts compared to winner-take-all countries, where debt skewed 65% higher. In terms of economic growth, one study from 2011 looked at data covering 107 countries from 1820 to 2002, while another looked at 91 countries from 1979 to 2010. Both found that proportional and semi-proportional systems gained up to 1% of GDP per year over winner-take-all systems. It's worth noting that 9 out of the 10 wealthiest OECD countries have proportional representation. So to recap, countries with proportional representation rank better on a wide number of social indicators, have less political polarization, make more money, and spend that money more wisely. In other words, sticking to our current system is likely making Canadians more divided, miserable, and poor every year. But on top of all of that, did you also know it's killing the planet? Now, before I get into the intersection of climate change and electoral policy, the election of Donald Trump probably has you feeling something like, fuck, what is even the point? And I get that. One of the biggest reasons we have irrational populism is largely due to billionaire oil money funding it to prevent action on climate change. For example, the Koch brothers bankroll right-wing think tanks in the Atlas Network, including the Fraser Institute in Canada and the Heritage Foundation in the US, who authored Project 2025. Is that foreign interference, or is it democracy in action? Coincidentally, Koch Industries just happens to refine the oil we send to the US at a discounted rate costing Canada billions of dollars a year, so, you decide. The Wilkes brothers, Christian nationalist franking billionaires from Texas, bankroll things like the Daily Wire, Jordan Peterson, and PragerU. It's one of the reasons why Jordan Peterson makes...
So you're on 140,000 as a professor, a learned man.
Yeah.
What do the numbers look like now?
What are we generating a month? Oh, it would be in 2 million, probably, something like that.
A massive accomplishment.
So far, so good. We're hoping it'll grow much beyond that. We'll see.
Tim Pool and several Canadian influencers were recently caught taking $10 million from Russia to support the war in Ukraine, all funded by oil and gas money. Even Climate Hero and Queen's University's most famous Nazi alumnus financed his purchase of Twitter with oil money from Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And I don't need to tell you how he's busy doing to the US government what he did to Twitter. The bottom line is, if you're looking at a loud, humorless reactionary who happens to sprinkle in a little bit of pro-fossil fuel talking points in with screeds about wokeness, DEI, men are under attack, and Western civilization, all while being clearly the most miserable motherfucker on the planet no matter how much money he makes, chances are the fossil fuel industry is cutting checks in there somewhere. The fact is, winner-take-all systems are structurally more vulnerable to corruption. Lobbyists love them because you only have to get one party on board. Plus, the return on investment is so much higher. The Trump campaign openly solicited a totally legal bribe of $1 billion from the fossil fuel industry, which sounds like a lot until you realize they'll get back like 1,000x because...
Today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill.
For a country that was already drill baby drilling more than any other country in history under the Biden administration. That money helped secure 100% of the power, but if the US had a proportional system, the return on investment would be much closer to zero. So no wonder the Koch-funded Fraser Institute pays their own experts to pen op-eds about the dangers of proportional representation every time the issue is raised. Proportional representation makes hacking our democracy much harder. The good news is, decades of peer-reviewed research show that countries with proportional representation act faster, do more, and deliver better outcomes for the environment. Our buddy Eric Leiphardt did a follow-up study in 2012 and found that proportional systems scored 6 points higher on the Yale Environmental Performance Index. That index covers everything from air quality to biodiversity to washing out your yogurt containers before putting them in the recycling bin, which, as we all know, is the most important thing you can do for the environment. Another study from 2014 tracked countries from 1990 to 2007. While carbon emissions were rising globally, countries with fully proportional systems only saw a 9.5% increase compared to a whopping 45.5% increase in winner-take-all countries. And proportional countries used 117% more renewable energy. So to recap, if you're one of those people who likes to enjoy little things like drinking water, or breathing oxygen, or not melting when you step outside, the evidence is pretty clear that improving democracy is necessary to having stable, prosperous societies on a habitable planet. Unfortunately, instead of finding common ground, our winner-take-all system has us pulling in different directions. Long-term planning is effectively impossible under winner-take-all systems like first past the post due to a phenomenon called policy lurch. That's when governments waste time, energy, and money erasing policies from the previous government, put in their own policies, only to have those replaced later by the next government. Canada has loads of examples. Heck, Toronto alone, with its long history of dead transit projects, is a case in point. Policy lurch is bad for economic growth because businesses like investing in countries where the regulatory landscape doesn't get pulled from out underneath them every 4 years. That same thing is true about climate policy. Large businesses tend to be large polluters. Keeping those rules consistent lets them plan properly and make long-term investments like decarbonizing. In Nordic countries, for example, businesses know climate policies are going to be there no matter who wins the next election, so they have some of the best climate records in the world while also making good money. But in Canada, businesses are constantly pulled between lurching governments. First, there's a carbon tax. Now it's axed. First, you can build clean energy here, now you can't. Sometimes policy lurch happens in the same government. When Ontario Premier Doug Ford was first elected, he canceled a bunch of clean energy projects, costing taxpayers millions in penalties. But now, because they realized just how cost-effective they are, the Ford government is building wind turbines again. We need to zoom out from the 4-year election cycle and recognize that we are facing unprecedented threats that require consistent, reality-based governance, from AI to gene editing to pandemic risks, monetizing biodata, wealth inequality, rising authoritarianism, nuclear proliferation, biodiversity collapse, forever chemicals in every drop of rain, and microplastics in your nards. Humanity, as a species, is doing a whole lot of f***ing around. And if we do not have rational, long-term responses, we may not be here to do much of the finding out. Proportional representation is just one of those things that we need to do to take our heads out of the sand. But wait, I hear you say, what about those unhinged parties?
Did you stumble on microplastics in your?
I might have.
In your yards or nards?
Nards.
Okay, nards. You meant to say nards.
It's in the script.
Got it.
This is a nards friendly script. One of the most common arguments against proportional representation is one that Prime Minister Trudeau has talked about, which can broadly be called the "but what about the people getting power" argument. Sure, he might say, the hippie environmentalists get a few more seats, but what about the unhinged people who think climate change is a hoax, bird flu should be added to raw milk to strengthen your immune system, and exposing your genitals to UV rays gives you sexual powers?
My name on Twitter is Benjamin Braddock. I'm a right-wing bro scientist. And yes, I tan my balls.
Okay, yes, marginal parties have a lower barrier to entry with proportional representation, but typically they have to hit some threshold of about 5% of the vote to gain a seat. But then the argument usually goes, what if the unhinged party becomes a kingmaker in a coalition government, giving them outsized power? And to that I say, maybe. I can't guarantee that that won't happen, but as long as we're scaremongering here, let's consider the alternative. As the US has made abundantly clear, having a winner-take-all system does not prevent extreme voices from gaining power. In fact, the opposite is true. Thanks to the incentives baked into winner-take-all systems, extreme voices can become amplified through polarization. That means, far from being just kingmakers, unhinged people are more likely to become actual kings. and not the harmless kind with the hilarious bratwurst hands. The worst case scenario for any country is civil war. One study looked at 138 countries over a 35-year period, tracking 68 instances of civil war. The result? No country with a proportional parliamentary system went through a civil war in this period. All of the unhinged people came to power under a winner-take-all system. That's the real danger you should be worried about. At least under some kind of proportional system, you can contain extreme voices or just flat out ignore them by giving them a seat as they tan their taint at the table. You might be watching this and thinking to yourself, oh, this guy is just talking about proportional representation for self-serving reasons. He just sees it as a way to push his niche issue of preventing our species from self-termination due to the toxic byproducts our civilization inflicts on the physical and biological systems that make organized human life possible. And yes, that's 100% true. But that doesn't negate the fact that, based on the evidence, a fair democracy helps everyone. And it's not an overstatement to say that the future of life on Earth depends on our ability to govern ourselves. And that means removing the perverse incentives eroding democracy, which simply cannot be done under a winner-take-all system. So, if you made it this far and you want to make proportional representation happen in Canada, there are a few things you need to know. People have been working on this for decades, and the problem always comes down to the process of deciding which electoral system to choose. This is a picture of me at 21, working on a political stunt for the referendum for mixed member proportional in Ontario in 2007, and yes, that is a wig, and no, I will not explain why I'm wearing it. That secret dies with me. That campaign failed in a referendum because referendums are where electoral reform goes to die. There have been 7 campaigns for proportional representation at the provincial level, from BC to PEI, that all failed in referendums. Frankly, referendums are good for 2 things. 1, deciding on very simple questions like leave or stay, and 2, pissing off Quebecers forever. That is it. While referendums seem democratic, most people don't have the time and energy to compare the technical ins and outs of voting systems. We don't have referendums on tax codes or nuclear safety protocols for the same reason. A more democratic approach is to get a bunch of regular people together, put them in a room, and have experts impartially explain the pros and cons of different electoral systems. Then those people deliberate and make a recommendation. This is called a citizens' assembly. It's like jury duty for policy, and we've talked about it a little bit in our video on monopolies. A citizens' assembly is how we should choose our next electoral system, not a referendum. But first, we need the next federal government to commit to this idea. So, if you're watching this video around the time it was released, Canada has a federal election coming up, and now is the time to pressure candidates with 2 questions. 1, do you support proportional representation? And 2, if so, will you support a citizens' assembly to determine the best system for Canada? Remind them that a strong majority of Canadians want proportional representation, and it's crucial for winning your vote. Write to your MP, call candidate offices, post on social media, hopefully not on X, and of course, share this video. And if you want to get more active on this issue, head to fairvote.ca and join their mailing list. It's time to make every vote count.